The galaxy was old. Empires rose and fell like tides, but always the strongest survived. The Conqueror Empire was one of the strongest. For centuries they had crushed worlds under their armies and burned resistance wherever it rose. Civilizations far greater than Earth had fallen screaming in the dust, their histories erased, their names forgotten. To the Conquerors, war was not a risk, it was a routine. And somewhere far away, a small blue planet called Earth spun quietly in its orbit around an ordinary star. To the galaxy, Earth was nothing. A primitive backwater, a world that was barely crawling into space, stumbling across the moon, planting fragile domes on Mars and icy stations on Europa. Its people still argued, still fought with each other, still clung to old wounds and old fears. The Conquerors never even considered them a threat. They did not even mark Earth's name in their records. But then, the fleets came. The night skies of Mars were the first to blaze. Huge ships, black as shadows, entered orbit with silent grace. At first, the settlers thought they were new Earth ships, maybe a test, maybe a secret mission. But then the bombardments began. Cities carved into the red stone were torn open like paper. The ground shook with fire. Families screamed as buildings collapsed. Children were buried under steel and rock. No warning was given. No reason was spoken. The Conquerors simply attacked. On Europa, the same fate came. The great oceans under ice boiled as plasma lances cut deep. Stations drowned. Entire towns vanished beneath collapsing ice shelves. Communications crackled with desperate cries for help, but Earth could send none. The invaders had blocked the signals, choking the colonies in silence, and yet Earth itself still spun unknowing. People slept in their homes. Children went to school. Laughter echoed in streets while their brothers and sisters across the stars died in the cold vacuum. But soon the truth reached them. Refugees, broken ships limping toward home carried news of the slaughter. Survivors told stories of black armored giants tearing through their homes, of banners raised above burning cities, of endless legions chanting in alien tongues. The people of Earth listened in disbelief. Some denied it. How could it be true? Others wept. Others clenched their fists in rage. And among the leaders of Earth, despair grew. Humanity had always fought itself, yes, but this enemy was beyond anything they had faced. These were not rival nations with tanks and guns. These were conquerors of worlds, bearers of weapons that cracked mountains and split oceans. What could Earth do? The Conquerors were confident. They had seen this despair before in 1,000 other worlds. They knew how it would end. Humans would break, they told themselves. Humans would bow. They would beg for mercy like all others had begged before them. The Conquerors prepared their chains, ready to turn humanity into another forgotten slave race in their endless empire. But they had misunderstood something. They had looked at Earth from far away and seen weakness. They had seen wars, hunger, foolish politics, and thought it meant fragility. But they did not understand the truth of humanity. Earth was not weak. Earth was stubborn. And stubbornness, when cornered, became fury. Deep beneath mountains and hidden bases carved from stone, engineers and pilots gathered. These were places long forgotten, projects left in silence after old wars ended. But now doors opened, floodlights blazed. The sound of machines filled the dark. Steel wings slept there, jets sharp and fast, built for skies but reshaped for the stars. They were not elegant like the ships of the Conquerors. They were not covered in gold nor armed with weapons older empires had perfected. No, these were human creations. Raw, brutal, merciless. They were born from centuries of Earth's wars, sharpened by fire, designed by desperation. And into these machines climbed men and women who had lost everything, pilots with tears in their eyes, soldiers who no longer had families to return to, mothers who had buried children, sons who had seen fathers die. They strapped themselves in, hearts trembling but voices steady. They swore not only to fight for survival but to fight for vengeance, to make the invaders remember Earth. Above, the sky was dark. The Conquerors watched, amused, as signals rose from the planet. They did not fear. To them it was nothing, but in the runways below, engines roared for the first time. The sound shook the mountains. Flames licked the ground. One by one, the black jets slid forward. Their wings cut the air. Their pilots gripped controls with trembling hands, and somewhere deep in their hearts a fire lit. The silent world was no longer silent. Earth had awakened. Darkness lingered over Earth. Cities had grown quiet since the invasion began. People no longer trusted the night sky. It was no longer beautiful. Every glimmer of starlight carried fear. Would another fleet appear? Would another bombardment begin? Families whispered prayers in basements. Children pressed their ears to radios for news, and leaders met in secret rooms, their faces pale with dread. But beneath that fear, a spark was forming. The conquerors thought they had broken humanity's spirit. They saw the tears, the ruins, the graves, and they thought it meant surrender. They believed that Earth would bow like every other world. Yet they did not understand that human grief often gave birth to fury. In hidden hangars beneath mountains and oceans, old projects were reborn. There were places on Earth the conquerors did not know about. Forgotten tunnels carved in the Cold War, secret bases where humanity had once prepared for its own destruction. In those shadows, engineers worked without rest. Old designs, long buried, were pulled from vaults. Prototypes that once gathered dust were cleaned, armed, and given new life. The jets were unlike anything the invaders had seen before. They were not massive like alien warships, nor smooth or elegant. They were sharp, black, and predatory, machines that looked more like blades than aircraft. They had been designed for Earth's skies, but humanity had learned to adapt. Engines were reforged, weapons refitted, cockpits sealed for the void of space. What once had been only machines of atmosphere were turned into something new, something terrifying. And when the pilots gathered, the hangars grew heavy with silence. They came from every corner of Earth. Some wore the uniforms of soldiers, their medals hidden beneath dust. Others were civilians, pilots from airlines, explorers from failed space programs, test flyers who had always dreamed of reaching the stars. Each one carried scars, some visible, some hidden deep within their hearts. One man had lost his wife on Titan. A mother held only a necklace now, her children's faces forever burned into memory. A young woman had fled from a collapsing dome on Mars, the screams of her people still echoing in her ears. None of them were whole. All of them carried grief like a second skin. When they strapped themselves into their cockpits, their hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what they had sworn to do. They were not fighting for medals. They were not fighting for glory. They were fighting for graves already filled, for homes already burned, for the right of Earth to exist, and above them the conquerors laughed. In orbit, alien commanders watched the signals rising from Earth. Their sensors marked the strange ships being prepared. To them it was amusing. Primitive toys, they called them. Metal insects buzzing in their nests. The commanders mocked the humans. They think these fragile machines can pierce our shields? They think they can fly against the storm? They laughed louder when they saw the first engines roar to life, but inside the cockpits the laughter never reached. The pilots did not hear the mockery. They only heard the sound of their engines, the thundering roar shaking the ground. They only felt the fire in their hearts, hot and merciless. When the first black jet rolled onto the runway, soldiers on the ground saluted. Workers raised their fists, tears burning their eyes. Children who had lost everything whispered, "Go, please go." The jets were no longer just machines. They were symbols. They carried the weight of Earth's grief, the rage of its people, the stubbornness of its spirit. Every engine flame was a promise. Every weapon mounted was a vow. In that moment, humanity was no longer a victim. Humanity was preparing to strike. The pilots looked at each other through comms, voices steady despite the storm in their chests. "This is not survival," one of them said. "This is revenge." Another whispered, "Let the galaxy remember us." Then the orders came. The hangar doors opened. The night sky waited. One by one, the jets accelerated, wheels tearing against the ground, wings slicing through the air. Fire erupted behind them as they lifted, breaking free of Earth's atmosphere. Clouds parted. The blackness of space swallowed them, and the Conquerors, watching from orbit, leaned back in amusement. They thought they were watching humanity's final struggle. They thought the spark would flicker and die, but they were wrong. What rose into the stars that night was not weakness. It was fury turned to steel. The spark had been lit, and it would burn until empires fell. The blackness of space stretched forever, vast and silent. Conqueror warships floated in orbit above Earth, massive shadows blotting out the stars. Their hulls were lined with glowing symbols. Their weapons pulsed with energy. Their shields shimmered with arrogant strength. They had crushed 100 worlds with these same ships. To them, this was routine. In the command chamber of the lead flagship, alien generals watched calmly. Their voices hissed and clicked as they mocked the human resistance. "They rise in their toys," one sneered, its claws tapping the metal table. "Let them come. It will be brief." Another laughed, cold and certain. "The humans will scream. Their fire will fade in moments, but outside, cutting through the void." The humans did not scream. The first Earth space jets broke free from atmosphere, their engines blazing like falling stars in reverse. They climbed higher, faster, sharper until the blue planet fell away behind them. The pilots' faces were pale but steady, their breaths harsh in helmets. Fear sat heavy in their stomachs, but it was swallowed by something greater. Rage. "Targets in sight," whispered Captain Arlen, leader of the first squadron. His voice trembled only once, then hardened. "For Mars, for Europa, for everyone we lost." The squadron responded as one. "For Earth." Then they attacked. The Conqueror fleet fired first. Great beams of plasma cut across the void, wide enough to slice entire cities in half. To the aliens it was over. No ship could dodge such storms. But the jets were not alien ships. They moved differently. They danced. The jets twisted, rolled, and sliced through the beams with impossible grace. They were not great hulks relying on shields. They were predators relying on reflex and fury. Human pilots pressed against crushing G-forces, their vision blackening at the edges, their bones straining. But they did not break. They had lived with gravity their whole lives, fought wars in the skies of Earth. This was their home ground. This was flight. Plasma beams roared past them, missing by hair's breadths. The Conqueror generals blinked in shock. "Impossible," one hissed. "They should be vaporized." But still the jets came, their formations sharp as knives, weapons armed. Missiles streaked forward, cutting through space like arrows of fire. The first struck a Conqueror cruiser. The aliens laughed as their shields flared. "Child's play," they mocked. But then the shields flickered. Then they cracked. Human missiles were crude, yes, but they were clever. Packed with dense metals, hardened tips, and explosives designed not to burn but to pierce. They struck again and again, drilling into weak points, forcing the shields to bend under stress they were never meant to face. The first cruiser shook violently. Its engine sparked, sputtered, then went dark. A second later, flames ripped across its hull. Then silence. The ship exploded, scattering burning metal across the void. For the first time in centuries, a Conqueror warship had fallen. The humans cheered through comms, their voices breaking with emotion. Tears blurred some eyes, but their hands never left the controls. "One down," whispered Captain Arlen, his voice raw. "Keep pushing. Make them bleed." The aliens no longer laughed. The jets weaved through the fleet, cutting apart ships one by one. Every missile was a dagger in the Empire's pride. Every explosion was a roar of vengeance. The Conquerors fired back with all their fury, but their massive weapons could not catch the tiny darting shapes. The jets slipped through fire like shadows, striking engines, tearing into weak points, vanishing before counterfire could land. The galaxy was watching. Across hidden networks and desperate broadcasts, enslaved worlds picked up fragments of the battle. They heard human voices screaming defiance, saw Conqueror ships burning against the stars. For the first time in generations, hope flickered. Back in the flagship, silence gripped the alien generals. The arrogance drained from their eyes. This is not possible, one stammered. Another slammed its clawed hand against the table, rage twisting its face. They are insects. They cannot win. But outside, the insects had become hunters. As the last cruiser of the forward line exploded, Captain Arlen's squadron regrouped. Their jets bore scars, hulls smoking, fuel running low. Some pilots were gone, lost in flashes of fire, but none had fallen in vain. Arlen's voice came through the comms, rough but steady. They thought we were prey. Let them learn the truth. He paused, looking at the burning wreckage of what had been an invincible fleet. Earth does not bow. And in that moment, the galaxy learned the same truth. The first strike had been made. The empire of the Conquerors would never forget the fire that came from Earth. The wreckage of the first battle still floated in orbit, a graveyard of burning steel. The Conquerors' fleet had been shattered. Their once proud flagships now spun silently, their hulls glowing with fire, their banners reduced to ash. And yet for Earth it was not enough. The pilots who returned from the first strike did not celebrate. They landed their scarred jets on hidden runways, their bodies trembling, their eyes hollow. Some stepped out into the arms of waiting crews, collapsing with exhaustion. Others stood in silence, helmets still on, unable to speak through the weight of grief. For every ship destroyed, for every alien burned, they still remembered the graves on Mars, the screams from Europa, the drowned stations of Titan. The war was not about victory anymore. It was about vengeance, and so the hunt began. Earth's leaders gave no speeches. There were no grand ceremonies. Instead, orders were whispered in secret. Pilots received new missions. Chase them. Hunt them. Do not let the Conquerors breathe. Humanity had been forced into war, and now it would make the stars burn for it. The jets left Earth's orbit again, dozens at first, then hundreds. They spread across nearby systems like shadows, searching for retreating fleets. The Conquerors, who had once marched proudly into human skies, now scattered like prey. In the system of Ceres, a warlord's fleet tried to regroup. Their ships hovered above the asteroid belt, refueling, confident that Earth would not strike so soon. But in the silence between the rocks, human jets waited, engines powered down. They drifted like hunters in tall grass. The moment the Conqueror flagship gave its orders, the void erupted with fire. Missiles screamed from the shadows. Jets dove out from behind asteroids, cutting through the fleet with merciless precision. Alien soldiers panicked, their voices shrill, their hands scrambling at controls. "Shields failing," they cried. "Engines burning." The flagship tried to retreat, but the jets swarmed it. They moved like wolves, circling, striking, vanishing. In less than an hour, the fleet was gone, nothing left but drifting husks. The warlord who commanded it sent his final message, a broken whisper carried through static. They hunt us." Across the galaxy, enslaved worlds listened. Hope stirred where there had only been chains. The Conquerors, however, knew only fear. More battles followed. On the edges of Saturn's rings, over the skies of Ganymede, in the empty void between stars, the jets struck again and again. No longer were humans merely defending their home. They were chasing the enemy, ripping apart fleets before they could regroup, shattering morale wherever they appeared. Every pilot became a legend. Stories spread of men and women who flew into fire without hesitation, who pressed forward even when their jets were torn apart. Some pilots rammed themselves into enemy cruisers when ammunition ran dry, their laughter echoing through comms as they lit the darkness with their final blaze. The Conquerors began to whisper among themselves. They had crushed countless races, but none had fought like this. None had chased them with such relentless fury. None had turned grief into fire so mercilessly. "They are not soldiers," one alien captain confessed, trembling in his command seat. "They are executioners." And executioners they were. The galaxy began to notice. Messages traveled faster than light, rumors spreading like wildfire. Slave races whispered of the humans from Earth, small, fragile, angry beyond reason. They called them the storm of the blue world. They said Earth's jets moved not with engines but with vengeance. And still, the conquerors fell back. They abandoned outposts, they left supplies burning, they ordered fleets to retreat deeper into their empire, desperate to escape the hunters. But no matter how far they fled, the jets followed. Captain Arlen, who had led the first strike, stood in his cockpit during one of those hunts, watching another alien cruiser burn. His voice was quiet, almost prayer-like. "We will not stop. Not until every throne is ash, not until every flag is broken. They thought us weak. Let them see what weakness becomes." His words spread through the comms, carried from squadron to squadron until every pilot whispered them like a vow. The hunt was no longer just war. It was retribution. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, where the conquerors once ruled with terror, whispers began to change. The empire that had crushed civilizations was now running, and the hunters wore human faces. The Conqueror Empire had never known fear. For centuries, its fleets had crushed rebellions before they began. Its armies had marched across worlds without pause. Its banners had flown over the ashes of 1,000 fallen civilizations. Fear was something they gave, never something they received. But now fear had come to them. It started with whispers. Broken transmissions carried across space, half lost in static. Warlords screamed of sudden ambushes, of fleets torn apart by shadows, of ships hunted down one by one. They spoke of human jets, small, black, merciless, dancing through plasma fire, tearing flagships open like prey. At first, the throne dismissed it. "Exaggerations," the council hissed. "Primitive insects cannot wound us. The fleets will crush them in time." But the reports kept coming. In the core systems where the palace towers rose like mountains of gold, hollow screens lit up with grim news. Fleets that had once been declared invincible were now gone. Warlords who had sworn loyalty had vanished, their fleets burning in the void. Entire regions of conquered space had gone silent. And the whispers turned into a single word spoken again and again. Humans. Alien generals who had once roared in arrogance now spoke in hushed tones. They described pilots who fought like demons, who rammed their own jets into cruisers when weapons failed, who laughed through comms as their lives ended in fire. They said the humans did not fear death, only surrender. One general, his scales pale with dread, spoke before the throne itself. "They are not soldiers. They are executioners. Every battle with them is not war, it is punishment." The court grew silent. Fear spread deeper when slave races began to rise. Worlds that had been chained for generations suddenly saw the empire bleed. They saw the hunters from Earth tear through their masters, and they began to rebel. Chains broke, banners burned. For every human missile that struck, another spark of rebellion ignited across the galaxy. The Conqueror Emperor raged in his palace. His throne hall shook with his fury, his voice a storm of curses. "They are insects."
"Insects cannot kill giants?"
he bellowed. But even as he roared, his generals avoided his gaze. They had seen the truth. Giants could fall. In orbit above a fortress world, another fleet prepared to hold its ground. Thousands of ships lined the skies, shields blazing, weapons armed. They swore to crush the humans once and for all. The humans came, not in great numbers, only a fraction of the enemy's fleet. But they moved with precision, with fury, with silence. They cut through the fortress world's skies, striking weak points, burning supply ships, turning defensive lines into chaos. They moved like hunters, never staying in one place, always striking where it hurt most. Hours later, the great fortress burned. Its skies were filled with wreckage, its proud fleet scattered into dust. When word reached the throne, silence fell across the empire. Warlords who had once begged for battles now begged for protection. Captains deserted, their ships fleeing into empty space. Soldiers muttered prayers in the dark, their claws trembling as they stared at the stars. The empire that had ruled by terror now felt terror itself. In the shadows of alien cities, citizens whispered of Earth. They spoke of the jets that came like storms, of the humans who fought not for power but for vengeance. Some began to carve the word into walls. Earth, a name that spread like fire. In the palace, the emperor sat alone on his throne of iron and gold, his claws gripping the armrests. For the first time in his reign, he felt the weight of fear press against his chest. He saw his empire cracking, his fleets burning, his people whispering, and in the void beyond he knew they were coming. The humans. Hunters, executioners, flames in the dark. They would not stop. Not until his throne itself was ash. The empire that once thundered across the stars now trembled in silence. World after world had fallen, fleets once thought eternal reduced to drifting wrecks. The conquerors, proud and merciless for centuries, could no longer deny the truth. Humanity was not just resisting. Humanity was winning. The palace that had once echoed with arrogant laughter now rang with desperate voices. Warlords gathered in dark chambers, their faces pale, their claws shaking. They argued endlessly, their words spilling over one another. "We cannot fight them any longer," one hissed. "They burn our fleets like dry grass," another whispered. "They are relentless. They do not rest. They do not fear." Silence followed before a third voice, heavy with despair, spoke. "We must beg." The words tasted like poison, yet no one argued. The empire that had forced countless worlds to kneel would now kneel itself. It was unthinkable, but it was the only choice left. Envoys were chosen, ships of gold polished until they gleamed. They were sent not with armies but with offerings, crates of wealth stolen from conquered worlds, artifacts of civilizations erased, jewels carved from suns themselves. They carried messages written in trembling hands. "Peace. We beg for peace." The envoys reached Earth's orbit, their voices carried across comms. "Great warriors of the blue world," they pleaded, "we were wrong. We underestimated you. Accept our surrender. Accept our tribute. Let there be no more war." But Earth remembered. In the control rooms below, human leaders watched the transmissions. They saw the gold, the jewels, the wealth piled high in alien ships. None of it mattered. They remembered burning cities, drowned oceans, graves filled with children. They remembered the screams of Mars, the smoke of Europa, the silence of Titan, and they remembered the arrogance, the way the conquerors had mocked them, called them insects, promised to erase their world. The pilots in their black jets waited for orders. Their comms were silent until one simple command came through. Not words of negotiation, not acceptance, only two words. No mercy. Engines roared to life. The envoys panicked. Their transmissions grew frantic. "Wait. We beg you." The words cut off in static as missiles struck. Fire blossomed in orbit, bright enough to light the night skies below. The golden ships shattered, their treasures spilling into the void, their pleas silenced forever. The message was clear. Humanity did not forgive, and across the galaxy, the reaction was thunderous. On enslaved worlds, people cheered. For generations, they had begged for mercy from the conquerors, and none had been given. Now they saw justice delivered, brutal and absolute. Chains were broken, rebellion spread faster, hope roared louder. But in the heart of the conqueror empire, despair deepened. Warlords screamed at one another, accusing, threatening, weeping. They had believed surrender would save them. Now they knew the truth. There would be no saving. The humans were not conquerors seeking wealth or land. They were vengeance given wings. They would not stop until the empire itself was ash. On the front lines, human pilots felt the weight of their mission press down heavier than ever. Some had once dreamed of peace. Some had wished that the war could end with surrender. But after hearing the cries of the colonies, after seeing the scars of their people, they no longer carried doubt. Captain Arlen, scarred and weary, stood before his squadron before another hunt. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "They beg now," he said. They beg because they know fear. But we remember the ones who begged them and were silenced. Did Mars receive mercy? Did Europa? Did Titan? No. And neither will they. The squadron answered with a single word, shouted through clenched teeth, never. When their jets launched, the skies trembled. The galaxy had seen many wars, many uprisings, many rebellions, but never had it seen this. An enemy that refused all mercy, that carried its rage into every battle, that turned grief into fire without end. The conquerors had begged. They had offered wealth, surrender, even servitude. Humanity answered with silence and missiles, and the galaxy understood. This war would not end with peace. It would end with thrones shattered. The skies above the conqueror homeworld had never known fear. For centuries their banners hung bright and unbroken. Their fleets patrolled with arrogance, and their throne burned with the pride of 1,000 enslaved worlds. But now the sky was fire. Human jets, dark and merciless, tore through the clouds like blades. Their engines roared like storms, their trails streaked across the heavens like judgment itself. The last of the conqueror fleets, desperate and broken, rose to defend their world. But they were not fleets, they were wreckage held together by hope. And hope against humanity was nothing. Missiles screamed. Beams lit the sky. Ships once worshipped as untouchable flagships were shattered in minutes, falling like dying stars upon the cities below. On the throne, the conqueror emperor sat stiff, his claws clutching the armrests until cracks splintered through the stone. Around him, his court trembled. His generals no longer roared with confidence. They whispered in fear. "They are here," one muttered. "They will not stop." Another whispered, "They will break through the palace gates." The emperor rose, towering, his voice a desperate growl. "Summon every guard, every weapon, every defense. I am the throne. I will not fall." But even as he spoke, thunder echoed closer. The palace walls shook, dust falling from golden ceilings carved by the hands of slaves. Outside, the world burned. Captain Arlen led his squadron at the front, his eyes locked on the colossal spires of the conqueror capital. His jet cut through the smoke, his voice steady across the comms. "This is it," he said. "No more warlords. No more begging. Tonight their throne dies." The pilots answered in unison. "For Earth. For the fallen." The squadron descended. Palace defenses came alive. Towers spat beams of light. Cannons filled the sky with fire, but the jets danced between them like shadows. Explosions lit the ground, walls crumbled, statues of long-dead conquerors cracked and fell. And then the palace itself came into sight. It was vast, carved from black stone, burning with the blood of generations who had built it under chains. Its gates gleamed gold, its banners screamed of power, but to human eyes it was only a target. Missiles struck. The gates burst apart, gold turned to dust. Human boots followed, the first to ever step inside as equals, not slaves. The throne room shook as the humans entered. Soldiers tried to resist, but their weapons fell silent under the storm of Earth's wrath. Smoke filled the air, and through it stepped Captain Arlen and his squadron, faces hard, eyes filled with fire. The Emperor stood tall, desperate to hide his fear. His voice cracked, yet he forced it out. "You cannot kill me. I am the throne. I am eternal." Arlen's voice was quiet, but every word carried like thunder. "No throne is eternal. No empire stands forever. You showed no mercy, and now neither will we." The Emperor raised his blade, roaring in defiance. But his roar was drowned out by the sound of jet engines outside, the sound of explosions shaking the palace, the sound of history itself breaking. The battle was short. The Emperor fell to his knees, his crown rolling across the stone floor. His eyes, once filled with fire, now burned only with disbelief. He whispered, almost begging, Why no mercy?" Arlen looked down, his scarred face like stone. "Because Mars begged. Europa begged. Titan begged. And you gave them nothing." The final shot echoed. Silence followed. The throne was empty. For the first time in history, The Conqueror homeworld lay silent. The banners of oppression were torn down, burning in the winds. Across the galaxy, enslaved peoples watched the signal that spread. The throne had fallen. The Empire was no more. On Earth, cities lit the night in celebration. Bells rang, families wept in relief, and graves were visited with flowers as if the dead could finally rest. Humanity, scarred but unbroken, stood tall among the stars. The message carried across every world, to every species that had once feared the Conquerors. The message was clear, carved into history with fire and blood. Do not mistake Earth for weak. Do not mistake humanity for prey. Because when the sky burns with the fire of human jets, when Earth rises in defiance, no empire, no throne, no conqueror survives. The galaxy would never forget.